So this is what I went over this month at the elders meeting that you were absent at, and I just want to take a few moments and just go through with you the things I talked about there, just so that you're on the same page as we move forward with community group ministry. I'm presuming that you have already watched the video that Ken did last spring on group multiplication and our vision for group ministry. If you haven't done that, you should really just do that first and review that. I am going to highlight several of the things that Ken mentioned in that again, and then I'm going to transist into your role in regard to this group multiplication process. The other thing I just want to mention to you is the coaching handbook. You'll have that available to you. I'm going to email that to you, and you'll want to review that material. It will be comprehensive. I will touch on several of the things in that handbook, but I just want to highlight that you want to refer to that as you move forward. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the things that Ken mentioned. Let me just highlight things. First of all, we want to just think about why groups. Remember that he talked about that this is our main model of ministry. And basically we find that this is a good approach for discipleship, that more people are likely to take responsibility in the church, more people are more likely to be getting into God's Word and applying it into their lives if they are connected with a few other believers on a consistent basis. So we really are convinced that this is a very appropriate way for us to do discipleship ministry in our church, and that's why we're advocating for it and really want to see everybody get involved in a community group in our church, and why we are encouraging multiplication. As we notice from this picture, that a group that begins with just one group in the first year, and if they are multiplying year after year, every 2 years, you actually will get up to 16 groups by the ninth year, just from that one group, which to me is pretty incredible for you to think about, and how many groups we can multiply if we are intentional with it. And I've shown this before, but this is a diagram really of how mentorships were integral in the New Testament church as the church spread throughout the era of the New Testament. Let me just take a moment and highlight just one line here. If we think about the story of Barnabas and his influence on Saul, that was later known as Paul, we see that he really is the one that took Paul under his wing. In fact, he's the one that really got him into the church in the first place, and kind of sponsored him and advocated for him when the church was hesitant to accept him because of his past history. And then later on in chapter 11, that's where we find that he actually seeks out Paul when Paul is in Tarsus and brings him back to Antioch, and they serve as a teaching team there. And then later we find them going out as a missionary team. What's interesting to notice is that when that missionary team starts in chapter 13 of Acts, Barnabas' name is mentioned first in the team and then Paul's, but then it's flip-flops and Paul's name is mentioned first and then Barnabas, which probably means that indeed Paul now is the leader of the team and Barnabas takes the back seat, that Barnabas intentionally passed on the baton. At any rate, we see that Paul does the same type of approach to ministry as Barnabas does with Timothy. The second missionary journey, Timothy joins their team when Paul revisits Lystra. And it's interesting that we note that Timothy serves as a fellow worker of Paul and works with him in a variety of churches like Thessalonica or Corinth, to mention a couple. And we notice the fact that he hopes to send Timothy to Philippi. In fact, he classifies him as a son who has proved himself well in Philippians chapter 2, verse 22. At any rate, we notice that Timothy is sent to Ephesus there, and when we get to the pastoral epistles where he's to sort out a messy situation. But notice that in 2 Timothy 2, 1-2, Paul exhorts Paul or excuse me, Paul exhorts Timothy to actually pass on the torch to faithful men so that they may pass it on to others, so that this continuous line is to happen. And what we note is that the church in Ephesus serves as a ministry hub of sorts for many other church plants that are mentioned in Revelation 2 through 3. So my main point of just emphasizing this to you is just again to see the fact that it is intentionally working in the lives of others that is integral to the multiplication concept, and then we're applying that to group ministry. So let's just talk a little bit about what our hopes are, what our plans are for this particular school year as we move forward with community groups. Now we have adjusted a little bit from what was presented in the video that Ken did last spring just because of the COVID situation. So what we're hoping for is for 1 or 2 brand new groups to be birthed that are independent of existing groups, just like we've been doing for the last couple years. In fact, I just met with somebody this morning who is going to launch a new group that will be one of those groups. But it is actually going to be then in January that we like to see some of our established groups begin to multiply. So we'd like 2 or 3 such new groups to begin in January to add people to it. And then maybe in March, we could add 1 more for other people that still need to get plugged into groups. Now, of course, you're going to get some pushback from people on, you know, I want to stay in my group. I don't want to, you know, divide the relationships and that. And so we need to be anticipating that and working with group leaders to move forward anyways. And so keeping that in mind, we want to offer a variety of possibilities. And Ken mentioned this, but for one, it might be sister groups. So a new group that is birthed from an established group can still have a connection together, an association, and be classified as sister groups. So they could do maybe once a month, every other month, a cookout together or a joint Bible study together, whatever they would deem appropriate to keep those relational connections and those ties going together. And it's a great way just to continue to help us see that we're a part of the greater body of the church and not just the immediate community group. In regard to the ways that can be groups can multiply, there are a variety of ways of doing it. And again, it really is up to the group, the given established group, and the group leader and the apprentice involved. And I just want to mention a few of these that as you work with your group leaders to keep in mind. Certainly you can divide the group in half, right down the middle. That's one way to do it, and so that you have a core in each of the new groups, and then add to that. Or one couple could start a brand new group, just launch that as a couple. Or you could take and have 2 couples together, and they serve as the core of the new group. So there's a variety of ways that will need to be explored with the group leader on ways to do this. It's not a cookie cutter approach, but rather what is going to work best for the given group and the situation at hand. All right, so those are a variety of ways to multiply. That really transits us into then to where you come into the picture. We know that our role as elders is to shepherd the flock, and not just to simply sit on a board. Our role is to really care for the flock. If I remind you of 1 Peter 5, be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade away. That's from 1 Peter 5. Now, notice the words watching over them, those that are under your care. Verse 1 of this passage actually is addressed to elders, so that is our role as elders, is to be a shepherd of God's flock, to care for those within our fold. And that's something that we should all be doing together. But having said that, we recognize that it is difficult to do that just on our own. And this is where the community group leader comes in, where the community group leader is actually a partner with you of sorts in the shepherding ministry. And this is where the concept of span of care comes into the picture, where we invest in a few so that those individuals can turn and invest in others. So as you invest in the lives of the community group leaders, they then are equipped and empowered then to invest in those in their group, so that no one cares for too many, but everyone receives care. So this is the idea of a span of care, of you working specifically with the group leader to make sure that that care is being administered in the congregation. So this is kind of an organizational chart of sorts where Ken and I both have a number of you under our care, and then you have a few leaders. Ultimately, that's the idea. Maybe it's a little small at this point, but a few leaders under your care so that this span of care occurs. So having said that, we need to then really think about what does it look like for you in your responsibility to work with a leader. What are the two things that you should be really carrying out? First, let's talk about the monthly meetings that you would have with your community group leader or leaders. This kind of meeting can happen, the most ideal obviously is in person, but it could also be over the telephone. It doesn't count, however, just to send them an email, but rather you should be making at least direct contact with them by phone, by Zoom, or by an in-person meeting. But let's talk about what it looks like to carry out this meeting. Of course, we want to show personal interest in them. That should be key on our agenda, is caring for them as individuals, to know how they're doing personally, what their spiritual temperature is of sorts, how they're doing, and then to bring encouragement, just as Barnabas did. What it says when he was at the church in Antioch, that he was glad and encouraged them all, that is the Antioch Christians, to remain true to the Lord with all their hearts. And obviously, we want to serve in that similar role to our group leaders, to encourage them to remain true to the Lord with all their hearts. So the personal element, how are they doing spiritually? What are spiritual needs or concerns that they're facing in their own lives, is something that we certainly want to pay attention to. And we also then want to determine what further help they need, what support they need to help them do better at their group ministry. So these are things that we want to check in once a month, either by telephone, Zoom, or in person, and just to see how they are doing. Here are some of the questions. Now you'll notice that these questions in the coaching handbook that I referred to a few moments ago, several of them are listed there, but you'll see there are a set of personal questions, and there are also a set of ministry questions. The point of those questions are just there for you to have, so that you have something to prime the pump, just to carry the conversation, to kind of know what types of things you should be asking and inquiring about. You write up your own questions. Obviously, you know best how to go about it, but we want to just provide you with some sample questions that you may want to think about to use to do the spiritual temperature, as well as equipping them for ministry and finding out how they need further support and assistance. Let's talk a little bit, though, about the first contact you're going to make with the group leaders after the training, the annual training that we'll be offering this fall. We're going to offer an hour-and-a-half training on the 12th of September, as well as the 14th of September. So you'll want to pay attention to that. You'll want to make sure you go to one of those sessions yourself. But you're going to want to then, sometime shortly after that training session, follow up with them for your first contact. And actually in early October, you're going to want to do that when the group is just getting started. And you want to find out, we're going to be using Caring for One Another by Ed Welch. All of us are going to do that in the fall as part of the campaign of just the One Another campaign. Ken's going to be doing a series on the One Another's in the New Testament starting at the end of September. And this book will actually be used in the groups as a supplement to that, just to continue to help us as a church family to really be intentional about caring for one another. So that's going to be the first question you want to ask them, is to begin to explore and to continue to think about, well, what will we do? What will be the next study after this particular one? Now, most likely, the group leader may not have an answer to that, but you are to begin to help them with that. Part of our training will cover the curriculums and talk about that. So that's why it's important for you to be there for that. Also, we'll, in a separate elder training session, talk about the curriculums with you directly as well. But at any rate, you want to begin to help them to think about that question, even if they don't have the answer immediately, so that they can begin to plan and work with their group and determining that ahead. Then you just want to know when they're meeting, where they're meeting, how often they're meeting, those logistics, just for your own information. It's helpful for you to know that. And the third question is really, as we think about the whole area of multiplication, you want to assess who they really are pursuing to be an apprentice. And thinking about processing through that particular question, obviously the first question is, do they actually have an apprentice or not? If they don't, you need to then begin to work with the group leader to figure out what tangible, practical steps they need to take to help them begin to select an apprentice. And again, in the training manual for the leaders, there is some guidelines and some pointers and tips. You should also have that training manual that will at least give some assistance on knowing how to find and select someone who can serve in that role in the group. If they do have an apprentice, are they ready? The question is, will they be ready to take on a new group in January or March, and assessing that. And if they're not ready, then again, what further steps need to be taken? We want to just continue to help be intentional on this and help them in the process. And then you also want to make sure that the group leaders are talking with their group even early in the fall about this multiplication idea of birthing a new group. And so when are they going to begin to discuss that? So in other words, we're trying to create some accountability here, trying to help them move in that process so that we actually see that this happens. All right, so that's the first responsibility, these monthly meetings. It's really important that you make contact once a month with the group leader to really see how they're doing. And then the second responsibility are the group visits, actually going twice a year to visit the groups. So in the fall, you should do it maybe November, December, early December, and in the spring in March or April, somewhere in that ballpark. And some of the things I'm going to quickly share here is there's much more detail in your coaching handbook. So when you actually begin to think about doing a visit, you may want to visit that chapter and just review some of the material there. But let me just highlight a couple things for you. Let's first of all just think about why. Why should you be visiting? Well, for one, you should view the individuals that are in that group or groups that they're really kind of under your watch care, right? So it's an opportunity for the people in the group to get to know you, as well as for you to get to know them and to become acquainted, and allows them opportunity to ask you questions and for you to ask them questions and so forth. But it also is an opportunity for you just directly to show support to the group leader, and it gives you a better opportunity, a better feel for the group and what's going on in that group from that visit. So when you're there, of course, you want to just simply observe what's going on, how the group functions, how the relationships are, and so on. And again, in your manual, in your handbook, you'll notice several questions or things that you should observe. And then you want to give some feedback and follow up with the group leader. So those are the that's really the group visit. So the two responsibilities is making the monthly contacts as well as the once in the fall and once in the spring group visit. All of that is going to become incredibly important for you to do that as you move forward. So as we move forward then and the role that Ken and I will do, like we talked about last spring, we are actually going to, resume those bi-monthly breakfast meetings with you. May look a little different than the way, may not be in a restaurant due to the COVID situation, we do it here at the church or Bluefields, but we will be in contact with you this fall and connecting with you and following up with you and seeing how it's going and trying to also encourage you and to help you. So if you have questions, you can certainly contact me. I'll be working on the next several weeks, working on the assignments of who's overseeing what. There'll be some adjustments that'll be made. Though a lot of you will have the same groups probably, but I'm currently right now trying to figure all that out. The groups themselves, which ones are still going to be meeting, and some might be disbanding or change of leadership and reshifting a little bit. So the next several weeks going to take a little bit of adjustment, but as soon as I get all of that figured out, I will be certainly informing you of who you're going to be coaching and so forth. And which supervising pastor and those things, all of those I'll be communicating with that. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact myself or Ken, and we'll help you in any way. We want to help you succeed at this in your ministry as an elder, and praying that God will truly use us and guide us as we move forward. So just thanks for taking these few moments to do this, and I pray that it has been helpful to you. Thanks. Bye.